other thing, don't we have some recourse on the apparent misinformation that we got on the condition of our old water meters, and that they were faulty, and we spent all this money on these new meters, and wasn't it in the paper that there's no difference now as far as gallonage that are being charged as compared to before?
I'll take that question. I would say you have to be very careful about the term misrepresented information. What they did was they took a sampling of meters, and
right.
and those meters were here in town.
Right.
So you can say that was misinformation because the sampling was used. Now, whether or not that sampling was adequate, whether or not that sampling was properly processed, I can't argue that. That's something that we're currently reviewing in-house to see whether or not everything was done to make sure that sampling was done the best way it should have been.
Well,
now, as far as a misrepresentation about the types of scenarios that could occur as a result of putting these meters into place, examples were given, and they weren't false examples of other locations. I believe a town in southern Minnesota was used as an example. I don't remember the name of the town off the top of my head.
We don't care about the other towns, really.
But the point was that was a part of the information that was shared. So when you say, is there any legal recourse for misinformation, I haven't been informed of any misinformation that was provided to the representatives at that time. Weren't those tests supposedly that were taken on the sample meters, did they not supposedly show that those there
meters
were some gallons?
Just a minute, that those meters were faulty and there wasn't enough gallonage reading through them, so these new meters, being 100% accurate, would pay for themselves?
That is
correct. What the deal was at the time?
That is correct, yes.
Okay, then don't we have some legal recourse to go back on that?
It's questionable.
There's a lot of money gone down the drain there, if not, for nothing. Like how many $100,000?
There was other arguments that are being made that wasn't the only justification for purchasing the meters.
What were the other ones then?
Well, there was a discussion that Mr. Johnston had at the last council meeting that the current meters were out of date, and that finding replacement and repair and maintenance material for these meters was becoming harder and harder all the time. In fact, they'd been reserved to the fact that they were now having to buy full meters to replace or repair existing meters.
Okay, but then so apparently there wasn't that much wrong with them, because nothing has changed as far as gallonage that's lost. Obviously, there was very little wrong with them.
There was another discussion, though, that there is no way to measure. That there was a lot of information put out there about these new water meters would be more accurate and it would show the actual usage. And they're pretty sure that when that information came out that people thought about their usage. And that's a very common thing to happen, that the usage would go down if they thought that their meters were going to show that they were going to use more.
The point I'm not making is the gallons of usage. I'm talking the difference in gallons processed and gallons billed.
Right. Well,
so there is very little difference now compared to what it was before the new meters were put in. Isn't that right?
That's true, but did I say it wrong? The point I was trying to make is that actually less gallons were used because people thought, okay, it's going to show that I really use more, so they tried to help themselves out by actually less usage.
Sure, but that doesn't change the
It changes the money that was brought in.
The actual money, but it hasn't changed the difference on what's processed and what's billed. That percentage or whatever is still the same.
Significantly the same, yeah. But what we don't know is if the meters, what she's getting at is we don't know if the old meters were under reading by, say, 10%. And that the adjustment that people made consciously after knowing that the new meters were going to come in, and it was going to cost them 10% more for water.
That's irrelevant. What is the point is that there's, let's say, 10 million gallons of water processed through the plant in a month, just for an example, and there's 9 million are billed. Okay, then there has been no change, as I understand it, from before the new meters are put in to now. The differential is still the same. There's a certain amount of loss to the swimming pool, to leakage here to there, and water mains, one thing or another. there is no difference, as I understand it, in the amount of gallons billed in proportion to what's processed.
There actually was over, if you look at, and I'd be happy to share with you the report that we did at the last council meeting. You'll see that usage has varied some from year to year.
Certainly.
And I've got the tracking numbers for the last few years so that you can see how it changed. The watermark year was 2006. We had never seen as high of water usage in the city as we saw in the year 2006.
Okay, but the differential is what I'm talking about. So there really wasn't that much, and I can't help but think that if the city went by the information from a company that tested a certain quantity of meters, and they said, well, these are faulty and they're not reading enough, or you're not getting charging enough because of these faulty meters, these new meters will help pay for themselves because you'll have an accurate reading. Am I not correct that that hasn't happened? There is no
on the
big
surface,
difference?
this discussion has taken place between Colin and I.
Okay, I'm just curious.
Nothing has come out of it that was gleaming that
I
something
wouldn't say
that
any
was...
more than that. If you thought the attorney, it should stay right there. I mean,
Yeah,
that's
you're probably right.
and all that then.
Okay. It just seemed like they would be accountable, whoever tested them, and the information that we got as a city, that they were faulty, that they weren't reading enough, that somebody should be accountable for it.
But that wasn't the only reason the new meters were bought, though.
What was the other reason?
He just explained to you that they had already outdated. They only last so many years, and after a period of time, they stopped making parts for
Well, it
them.
doesn't matter. Obviously, they were working fine, so what do we need parts for?
So if you have a car that's going to last you 30 years, you're going to drive it for 30 years?
Just because it's old doesn't mean we need to replace it.
Well, everybody else trades cars for different reasons,
Well,
because you've
How long
got to
is it?
replace cars.
How long have the new meters been in?
I couldn't tell you, Wally. Do you remember?
The bonding money was received in, was it August of '06? So they've, and of course I wasn't here, but I would assume that they would start purchasing the meters around that time period and start putting some in '06. So the second half of '06, Sandy, you were here. Second half of '06 sound right?
Later than that.
Later than that?
Yeah. You know, it's hard to go back and know what actual conversation there was about
Well,
why
certainly.
these were replaced and the different things, but based on the information that they received, they must have thought it was in the best interest of the community, or otherwise, why in the world would you do it? I'm sure they took that into consideration because these people were very conscientious about spending money. So, you know, based on the discussion and whatever took place at that time, I believe that they made the decision thinking that this was the best way to go. And whether we can hold anybody accountable or not, that's something that will probably have to be looked into. I don't know.
it just seems like it ought to be, because if I put a 30-year shingle on somebody's house and it turns out it's a 5-year shingle, I'm going to be responsible. And these people that said, well, these meters are faulty, they ought to be responsible. Seem like to me.